One of the interesting things that we found was that there were a lot of use cases in which there was investment made into AI tooling, but then stopped because they didn't see the ROI. The reason being is that a lot of these tools take you from 80% of the way there, but then you have to do that last kind of 20% of the work, which if you haven't done that first 80% can take like a really long time.
From Alvia, this is Preferred Return, your opportunity to learn from the brightest minds in the private capital market. Ready to own your technology edge? Let's get you that preferred return.
AI is everywhere. Every company is talking about it, every investor wants in, but making AI actually deliver results? That's where things get tricky. At White Star Capital, Usamah Khan is in the thick of it, evaluating tech startups, refining investment strategies, and helping founders turn promising ideas into scalable businesses. Welcome to the show, Usamah Khan. We're happy to have you here on Preferred Return. We're going to talk about a number of different topics today, but I think the first part we want to talk to, as we talk to a lot of people, is about the unlucky path that got us here. So you are, let's explore, a Dutch-born Canadian of Swiss nationality and Pakistani origin who started at a seed startup, secured a Series A, got an MBA, then went to White Star. In between, you've worked in the public sector, the private sector, in higher education, and in almost every role: marketing, sales, engineering, design, the whole spectrum. So basically, you're the Renaissance man, reborn, yeah?
Yeah, it's kind of you to say. I've touched on quite a few things in my career, but mostly like product data centric is a bit of my background. So born in Holland to Pakistani parents, but my dad is Pakistani origin, but Canadian. I was born in Holland, moved very early in my life to Switzerland, where I spent most of my life growing up. So from the age of like 5 to 18, at which point I moved to Canada and have, since then lived in places like Montreal, briefly lived in Beirut for a little bit, in Lebanon, and back to Montreal, London, UK, and now I live in Toronto, Canada.
Can you tell us a little bit about the path that you took from what type of work you were doing, and then specifically what took you to White Star and the role that you're in now?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So my background academically is in engineering. I went to McGill University in Montreal, Canada, and I studied civil engineering. What happened was kind of, I think a year or so before I graduated, I got this summer position doing research with a professor of mine. It ended up just being like cleaning of data. I started like learning like Stata, and then graduated a little bit to learning R, and kind of taught myself Python a little bit. And I think it was just in that where I just learn how to code a little bit. And then I was doing that research position for about a year and a half before I graduated. When I left school, I kind of looked at my degree and said, well, I don't want to go make roads or bridges. So let me try to do something with the skill set that I actually like doing, which was coding and being close to data. So that was kind of my decision to get into this space of like tech. And I was lucky enough to be in Montreal. It's a great city. It has a great ecosystem for startups. And that was a pretty exciting time. I think like Shopify was in its early stages around that time. I remember they had an office up the road from us, even though they were based in Ottawa, but they had opened up an office in Montreal. It was a good ecosystem. And I had a couple of different positions, but one that was interesting was I joined this startup called Ulala Mobile, which became Ready Education later, but that was actually an edtech startup. And I joined around the seed stage, and I came on as a data analyst. And my whole role for the time that I was there was taking app usage data. We used to make apps for universities, like the college campus app, and take like the usage data and try to bundle that into a report and then give that to our clients, our customers. And there's quite a number of them. I think at the time there was over 50, 60 customers that we had. And so just learning the whole process of taking the data, but then also building a report, and then also making it in a way by you can plug in and out personalized data to make the report personalized for the end user. And every now and again, I worked a lot with the customer success team there, and then I got to be in front of customers So all that was really interesting for me because while I was learning like a lot of just skills on just how to manipulate data and then put it through a pipeline, I was also learning kind of the business logic and how it impacted, conversations that were happening. So that was really interesting for me. And I work with some really great people, and I was happy to do that. In an effort to become like a better developer, I met a team based in London, this technology and design firm called Umbrellium. And I joined them and started working on projects there where it was really creative work that I was really excited to be a part of. So, we would take prompts from different stakeholders, mostly like public offices, and try to build products that at the time there was a big wave around smart cities. And so we're trying to build products that fit into that category. Really interesting work. I work with amazing people there, and it was very creative, very good at what they do. And we did projects like make wearables that you can, track. How do you feel about the air quality around you? The idea was uploading it to an app so that people can crowdsource an idea of what air quality is like in their region to share with each other, but then also take to their local councils and say, hey, we feel that the air quality in this location of our neighborhood is quite bad. Can you look into this? And you have evidence that a lot of people said it. So it was really interesting kind of taking an idea, but then prototype something that you think people would use. And so there were a couple of other positions I had where I worked a brief stint at the World Health Organization in Geneva. It was a data cleanup project for seeing what kind of medicines are out there, what countries have different medicines, and creating a unified database so that you can always look to it when you're trying to get malaria medication to somewhere that's in need of it. So all of these things, I always kind of felt very drawn towards designing new ideas or being close to early stage things. And I knew that a pitfall for a lot of projects was if you didn't speak to the person who you're trying to build for in their language or try to understand, what their needs are. I figured if I could do that, then that would be a huge asset to me. And I'd kind of been doing that a lot. So that was kind of my path into the MBA. Really spend my time focusing on data or a product perspective. If I'm studying marketing, like how can I learn the language to communicate with people in marketing if I'm trying to build something for them, or in finance, learn their language or strategy or in accounting or things like that. The interesting part of the story there about how I got to White Star was I was in my MBA right when COVID hit. So I had like 2 months left, but then COVID came, and then my wife and I, we had moved to London, but then they really shut down England, where I was like, do you want to go back to my parents' place in Geneva in Switzerland and just ride it out for the next 2 weeks and not be in this like small apartment in London? And so we're like, yeah, sure. And we literally got on the last flight. Like we got in at 11 p.m. in Geneva on, I think, March 18th it was. And March 19th, they shut all flights. So then me and my wife were stuck here in Geneva, which luckily for us ended up being great. But the point of that was we spent a lot of time there, but we couldn't go back to London. Switzerland was getting tough because my wife was overstaying visa, and then we're thinking about job prospects and whatever. So we decided to move back to Canada, to Toronto, where my wife is actually from. And it was in this time where I finished my MBA. I actually did a quick master's in statistics. Like I'd gotten, I had gotten accepted to this like dual degree program, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do it. But then because I could do it online, I was like, let me just do it. Let me just put in the time to do it. And it was while I was doing that I was trying to figure out, okay, well, I'm doing this now. What are my next steps? And as I told you, there was like the idea of my business logic that I was finding really interesting in early stage ideas. So I figured there's three places I could go. One was I could join a startup. The other one is I could probably maybe try consulting and see what that's like. Or I could be startup adjacent. And that's when I started learning more about venture capital, kind of wanting to explore that option a bit more. And White Star was just really lucky for me because it was almost like a perfect storm of things. So just to reiterate, remember how I mentioned that Montreal is a really good ecosystem for startups? White Star has played a big role in that. And actually, I knew of White Star for quite a while. My wife, she was really early in one of our startups, Dialogue. She joined like very early on, and they White Star funded the Series A. The guy who gave me my first job at a startup at Ulala, the VP of sales there, ended up moving to Dialogue, like Zach Brown. He ended up being the VP of sales at Dialogue. He also had a connection to White Star, just different companies that I knew that I admired in the ecosystem. They were all connected. So I should reach out to this team because I have this background. So I reached out to White Star, had a conversation with a partner over here in Toronto, Sanjay Zimmerman. I kind of said to him, look, I don't know anything about finance or anything like that, but I could help you build some products. I could come and explore this with you. And Sanjay very graciously was like, yeah, you don't know anything about finance, you're right. But yeah, it would be really interesting if you could come on and just see kind of some of the stuff that we're doing and maybe suggest things. So that's how I kind of came on at like a contract, like analyst level basis where I came to the team and I started very quick, like making just a few things, improving some products. We're building some products in the company, and those were just what I knew best, like reports, dashboards, things like that. But after like a month or so, what ended up happening was we were doing some deals at the time. And then I kind of just offered my opinion on some of the deals. And then that proved to be of value to the team. And then they asked me like, hey, can you actually help us dig through this space and like the technology? And we're looking at the RPA space for quite a while. So like what makes one RPA solution different to another, and why would someone use this over another one? It was Sanjay who actually said to me, it's like, hey, this is really cool. I think you could be of real use to the team. And I had mentioned I was just like on a contract kind of basis with them, but he said, if you want to, I can get all the partners in a room. And if you want to pitch your role of what you can do to the team, let's make it happen. So I pitched to the team, and they were actually super great about it. I felt like I almost didn't have to pitch, but I did it. I was just, but they were like, yeah, no, for sure. We thought of you as like, you're going to be joining the team. So that I officially joined November of 2021, I think it was. I spent half my time working on building internal tooling and tech and product for the team, working on like operational things. And then I spend the other half of my time helping the investment team on investments.
It's a wild journey. We're definitely going to dig into a little bit about internal build versus helping the deal team evaluate the technology arms of the firms you're looking for. And also this CTO to CTO conversation is pretty fascinating to me as well. Walk me back just in terms of now that you're like working with the deal team, looking at different people present ideas, concept, articulating technology strategy. When you were articulating yourself in terms of that presentation of yourself and what value, how did you articulate how the expertise you had in data and through all the technology would surface and play a role in an expanded mandate across the different deal teams? What was that translation for that input?
I was lucky that I had experience on one full deal. So we had actually done a deal, and I had a chance to work on the memo for that deal and do a technical deep dive internally. I had that, and I had a report that we had written. Again, it's one of those things that I kind of got lucky with, where we were building this report, but we were sharing it with some other investors who were coming into that round. So even though it was like an internal report and, I wanted to make it good, there's also a little bit of added pressure on other people who are going to be looking at this. So you have to just kind of really explain the technology, because you just don't know who's reading it. Like if it's internal, I know who the partners are, and I know what they're familiar with. I spent a lot of time just really trying to break down the technology, say it in a way that, was all encompassing, but then also explaining like, what is a microservice architecture? Why is it important for building this way? And just little things like that, like definitions that I probably skip over. And I had done that, and I was lucky enough to get good feedback from some of the partners who were quite happy with the level of like the report that I'd written. That idea kind of actually took hold, and especially with Alberto joining, who's super sharp and who's like really good at talking to CTOs and going through that whole process. But we've been able to kind of build this into our deal flow process, where I get to see every deal that we do in White Star that's reaching kind of like a later stage, and then be part of that and, learn the team, learn what they're building, and contribute to that knowledge. So that's kind of what we were pitching in the beginning, that, further down the line, we can do this diligence in a way to not just like diligence the company, but then have a record of what they want to build, how we can help them, something we can always refer back to and say that, hey, they want to build this offering in their product. They haven't done that yet. Let's figure out what the blockers are that seemed exciting at the time, or has the market moved? At least just something to be able to look back on. And we invest in tech companies that have products. Tech should be like an important part of that. Most definitely one of the reasons why I think we wanted to bring Alberto on, but then just having two people in place who could add to that, I think that snowballed quite nicely for us and for the role.
That makes sense. And I think that as we talk to people on both sides of the table of that, the deal side, a lot of it is, especially as you get these very complicated technological solutions and businesses that are built around them, in a short period of time, that ability to articulate the why of how it's important and what it's going to do with the requisite amount of detail about how it works, I guess, is always a fine balance between knowing the audience and knowing what's in there. So where do you generally weigh in, or when do you come in to kind of go under the covers of figuring out how viable is the solution, get into the data and the details and micro about like how it gets all the way down to the bottom and whether it's a viable product? Where do you generally come in that process in terms of doing that next layer of investigation?
Earlier and earlier, that's for sure. Normally it's around, for the most part, this is what it is. The team has had a conversation with the team. They're excited about the founders are excited about the space. They understand the market, the potential, excited about the traction. And then they just want to come in and say, well, is there a technology, something that is growing well? Is their team someone that we can back? Things like that. I think that normally comes right around before you want to issue a term sheet, but not quite like first conversation with the team. That being said, if there's something that is particularly tech driven, where, like the technology is core to the success of the company, that makes it a bit earlier, because then you can see things like, traction. It alleviates some concern about things like, customer concentration. Sometimes that happens a lot in like early stage, where you have on paper, it looks good. The company has got good recurring revenue for the year, but then you notice that it's actually like 40% of that's like with one customer. So then you say, what is this? Is it just because one customer just likes this and wants to use this? Or if they left, would other customers come on for, the strength of the technology of itself? Or is it just part of their system that they're not getting rid of it? They're just paying for it. You can't expect someone else to do it. So sometimes that helps to alleviate concerns like that. But especially with, real tech kind of plays, and everyone's doing AI these days, it becomes useful to have just a sounding board. The team is really receptive to, understanding, what is AI, what isn't. But also it's a good sounding board to say that how defensible is this, or has this team made something that seems simple, but is actually, it's like a very complex idea. That's kind of the way that we try to come in, show value, and the stage will always depend on the type of company, but generally not first conversation, but kind of around there.
It's interesting because it sounds like it enables the team to probably be more dynamic, right? Where you're able to understand the uniqueness of the technology solution, where the fit is potentially in a wider market, and the other parts of the team can focus on financials, the quants that underpin it, but you can bring separate lenses of view to complement one another, where you can see each other's gaps. Seems to be an interesting dynamic. So a question for that. So as you sat in the seat since November 2021 and seen a number of deals, as each company is different, have there been any themes where you're able to then pivot to your other role, right? And building the internal systems to monitor and do their function, that you're able to kind of see trends in the deals you're seeing to kind of start to put them apples to apples, or a framework with which you can build tools that allow you a better means of kind of thematically evaluating all these different solutions?
I think my timing of entering VC helped me. I was junior enough to actually have to do the work, but I was given enough trust and leeway by the team to have some say in how we build moving forward. I had an idea of kind of what are the things that you need to do during a deal that are pretty important. I had an idea of the kind of effort that it took to maintain a portfolio company, understanding the whole life cycle of a portfolio company from like the deal and then it becomes a company to like how you manage them to like what the exit kind of negotiations look like and memos that you have to write there. I started looking at things like, hey, well, we're doing this on a company to company basis. Everyone knows how well their company is doing, but they maybe don't know how well other companies on the team are doing. And that I think is really could be very helpful to them. So that ended up being a project that I did, which was taking all of our company data, unifying it in one place, and then starting to create like dashboards and reports on top of them. Once you start getting your data to a point that you're sharing it internally with the team, and now everyone has access to everything, people are smart and they start doing other creative things with it. And they start asking questions like, hey, well, we invested in some companies, it's Series A to Series B. What's the typical time for our portfolio from like a Series A to B? What should the revenue growth be? Let's break that down by sector. One of the sectors that we've identified, like e-commerce or something. And now in our deal flow, let's look at maybe comparing that to what a company should be at. I remember someone on the team telling me that that was useful for them to understand in a space that she didn't really know much about. This comes back to kind of why I did my MBA, which is speak the language of those you're trying to build for, and then it comes something of value comes out. And so that helped me a lot. Let me tell you a bit about like White Star Capital and the strategy. So White Star Capital, we are a global fund. We have offices in Montreal, Toronto, New York, in North America, in London, Paris, in Europe. We have people on the ground in Singapore, Tokyo, and Abu Dhabi. And also we have a team in Guernsey. We have people kind of everywhere. That was one of the things that, drew me to White Star, just being my background, but like the global kind of approach. We're pretty sector agnostic. We'll invest in most anything. We just don't do things like biotech or med tech, really because we don't have the expertise internally, but also certain things like anything that needs, FDA approval, stuff like that is hard to kind of make a clear assessment in. So we don't usually touch that. And we'll come in at Series A, Series B, around there. We've done a couple of seed deals and exploring that strategy as well. On top of that, while we have what we call our early growth fund, which is the Series A, Series B, we also have on the side a digital asset fund that focuses on anything in the kind of blockchain Web3 gaming space. And we have about 50 people working on the team worldwide. Kind of one of the reasons why I liked White Star, because of its global approach to the team and also how we choose to invest. One of the things that is really great is, at Series A, you're really looking to expand. And one of the things that we do at White Star, the team has a lot of experience in, is supporting, growth from one geography to another. So it's like, if we invest in you in New York or Toronto, we're a VC, we're right down the road from you. But then also you want to go to Paris and try open up something in France, or you go to London and try open up in London. We have people on the ground there. We have an office space you can go use, and it's the same people, same company. So that's kind of one of the real benefits that we try to share, like the real value adds that we have to our founders. We have a large group of venture partners who also come from varying backgrounds and spaces who can offer support and advice on moving into new regions or new spaces. One of the interesting projects I'm working on is one of those things that only comes to be a project because of the kind of global reach that we have. So one of the things I'm excited for is that we look at a lot of companies every year. We look at about like, if you go to our CRM, our deal flow CRM, we have about like 6,000 companies that we look at a year. When I say look at, that's 6,000 companies that enter our sphere of knowledge that like we know about. Obviously, we can't look at them all, and that's one problem. But then the other problem is for the companies that we look at that aren't right for us at the time, how can we find out if they are right for us later on down the line.
Interesting. Yeah.
It creates quite an interesting like problem, but then also approach like how you want to deal with your sourcing pipeline. Because I've been working on that a bit, or working with the investment team, you start to see certain things where people on the team were relying on, really putting reminders for themselves in the calendar to reach out to a company again, or having it on like a watch list, or catching up with people from other VCs and saying like, hey, how's this company doing of yours? At what stage are they at? And these are all, great ways of keeping up, but it's a lot of work. And then also when you want to do a refresh of your list, oftentimes it takes like an intern or, an analyst who's pretty bright in their own ways, but just see like, has this company been doing anything? Can you just follow up to them?
Yep.
And I thought that was inefficient. There was room to make that better information on how to navigate that. So I had actually spoken with a team here in Toronto, and we had looked at signals that indicate to us, if they're ready for the next step or they should be raising soon, so we can kind of get in there early. And there's certain things like if you notice there's a spike in headcount growth, which you can find from LinkedIn, or if you notice the website's been getting a lot of traffic, or if there's been a lot of app downloads, go to Crunchbase and then just see when the last funding round was. And if it's been more than 12 months since the last round of funding, these are all flags to consider that, maybe this company is in need of at least maybe reaching out, because they could be raising soon. So we try to orchestrate a way where we could pull all of that data into our CRM and then create these flags. And so if companies started to hit like 3 or more flags, then that goes to the top of the pile and says like, hey, look at this company again. And that's a more efficient use of people's time. We've been exploring different data providers and ways that we can get this data into our system. And that's something that's pretty exciting about VC, like in PE, the tech space right now. There's a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to source better. Data is becoming more of a commodity that you can just pull it, organize it, unify it. So there's all sorts of companies that like data enrichment tools and platforms.
That's awesome. It's interesting that last piece you touched on, where it's like when your data strategy helps people unlock ways to analyze, to push deals through. It's like what that progress that you talked about at the very beginning, where it's, I understand data, but I want to know the real world application of how this data can be used. And now it's there, right? Where it's, you're using the data strategy at White Star to empower the corporate strategy. And it's so often we hear it the other way, where there's a corporate strategy on down. And now this kind of flips the paradigm from a lot of what you're saying, where it's like you found a way to dissect the data, normalize the data, and then put it back together in meaningful ways to slice across deals or the companies that you've invested into, and allow the people who normally wouldn't touch that level of detail start to play with what they need to learn from it through business level questions of sector, geography, et cetera. So as you have a corporate strategy of, we can help you expand into different geographies. Now I can analyze previous funds, the companies invested into, their growth trajectory and what happened in different geographies. Now it's, people are asking questions of data in a more agile way because they're able to get the answers back quickly. And it's always exciting to see how that data strategy now becomes a tool that people never thought they'd be able to use more readily. So it's super exciting.
It's one of those things as well where it's the team is asking these questions, or
Right.
was asking these questions. So it took a while to get answers to it. And so once you spend time like understanding that like what is helping the teams work to move forward, and then what can you do to support that so that they can ask like, more questions or like deeper questions about things.
Not to sound too lofty, but we're both data and tech people, where it's like you've changed the paradigm of how the business is evolving to, because people are now empowered with what is possible with the data. And so now they're more readily bringing questions, because I think that adoption piece that you've hit is always the hard part, right? The tech can do the job, but are the people willing to use the tools to ask those questions? And the more readily it's available and the more easier it is to use, the more active they'll be as engaging that data, right? Which is part of the thing where I think it's unlocked. I mean, do you see that a lot where, especially the companies that you talk to, about that adoption layer where it's like we've solved the problem, but the adoption, the answer is right there. Do you deal with that a lot with some of these companies that are having these more nascent technology offerings where it's it works, it does the job. How do we get the adoption to bring the horses to water?
Yeah, 100%. I think adoption is the biggest thing you have to solve for. And that's just across the board for product in general, whether it's like internally what we're building, but then also like what other companies are building. And one of the things with adoption is that, at least like what I've learned, you can't make people adopt something that's not part of their workflow because they will very quickly reject that unless you are bringing so much value that they can circumvent, a work stream that they're doing. That second part is a lot harder to do, like bring so much value that you're like circumventing that. So the only thing you can focus on is what is their actual process for doing things. And then you have to build within that. And then that's the tricky part. You have to spend a lot of time with customers. And I'm talking like, if I'm talking internally, it's just, you have to spend a lot of time with the team. You need to understand like what they're doing, preferably do the work yourself for a little bit, but then also sit with everyone. Alberto and I, like our CTO, we do this. We do every kind of 2 quarters or something. We pick a topic and we just organize an hour session with like focus groups, 2 to 3 people on each, and then just spend an hour talking to them about what do you do in deal flow? What's your biggest blocker? Once you have that down, and let's say you've had like 10 or so conversations, then you just look at what is everyone doing and what are some people asking for, and then hit the thing that everyone's doing, and then try to bring in the ideas that other people have that, could suggest that my workflow would be better if we had this tool, or if I had access to this, things like that. There are so many tools that are really helpful, that are great, that do a lot. But if you don't set them up in a way that matches the workflow or the processes of the people that you're building for, they're not going to get adopted, and you will get pushback.
Oftentimes the people who are the most reticent or the most vocal critics of why it can't go are almost always the biggest advocates, because they have a problem that's seemingly so insurmountable that they can't see how this is going to help. And it feels like such a reverse motion, where the people who are pushing back the hardest, like you said, they care the most, but they have the most details. When they start to see the light, that though they generally unlock everybody else in terms of like seeing that it's possible, understanding the process. But I think you're right. I said Antimanthea, but if they push back, they care. It's the people who leave on the desk. But I mean, you hit on a number of really good points. The one part is like meeting people where they are for the work that they're doing and how they're doing it, and understanding those different parts of their process, seeing what's shared and common, and seeing where other people are doing things differently. That's always the work where I think your lens is so critical, which is I'm wondering how you play that out, right? So it's like when you're at White Star, your deal teams, IR and fundraising, like you're able to kind of have a mastery, so to speak, of what they're doing just based on tenure there and depth of White Star specific usage. When you're talking to the companies that come before you, how are you unlocking at such a high volume the thousands of companies that come to you, how they are doing that process for their clients? Like, how are they understanding their clients, so to speak, and they're going to get coal on their face to understand where their product meets, the need of the process?
I think it's almost something though that it's relevant, but because we are investing, like the stage that we're investing at, it's a little de-risked because the money can tell you that, So like if a company has been selling and they have customers and they have like recurring revenue, that can tell you that people are paying for something and that they like it. We're not dealing too much with like seed stage products where they haven't found product market fit yet. So really, to answer your question there, that's something that is not necessarily like the biggest aspect that we do in our due diligence, because honestly, we learn a lot from customer behaviors, from what the teams that we talk to tell us. One of the things that is always great is that if the team has like a really deep understanding of their customers, the space they're selling to, then that's always like a great signal for us. That'll come with people either being in that space. That's one of like the biggest like things that de-risk. You say like, oh, the founder's been in the space for 10 years and now wanted to start this. Like, that's amazing. Let's look at that. The other thing is that if they can have an in-depth conversation to you, telling you what this consumer base is like and back that up with data, be that financial, but then also usage data, then you're like, okay, just to answer your question, I think just because at the stage we're at, that's more so like how we start to view things like product market fit.
Market validation is in the fact of the ARR number. So it's like it de-risks you there. Not your brain is programmed, but like you came from this like data up to insights, but you can start to hear as you talk about it, you're talking about like, this is a signal and this is a signal, and normalizing across this different user base to say like, these are inputs to an end realization of this is worth investing into. And it's so fascinating to see how it's like real world themes are getting put into like signals or data points that can aggregate up to be able to analyze deals as they come in different forms. Is so fascinating to see like the real world application of that, and it's happening real time. And the other aspect is you can see your background extrapolated out to the company strategy, right? Like, so when you started, it's almost like a post MBA paid MBA when you were trying to learn more about the business side and the application of the knowledge. And as you're investing in these companies that are at the stage they are, the company is doing the same thing. It's a paid MBA, so to speak, in each of these companies, their sectors, micro sectors, et cetera, of how they're doing and how they're tackling it to continue to be like, you're a lifetime learner, obviously, so intellectually curious, but the firm is that same way. And those successful firms that we've seen are the same way, where it's like each of these are an investment, truly, that has an end, economic output, but is also to strengthen the team's competency in these areas. And viewing it as such is, it's really interesting to see, especially as White Star's done such a great job with it. It's like how that application hits.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think the team like does a good job with that. Especially things move fast in VC, so you got to kind of keep up to date. But there's so much you can learn from the past and what you've done before that can guide or inform some of the decisions that you're making now, even if it's not the same sector or space or anything like that. At least some of the thinking that never goes away, like the logic of why you did something or the thinking behind.
And especially as you have like a cogent data strategy, like you're talking about, like all those insights are compounding, right? The longer and longer that library, the more lessons you have as the signals can just add to that insight. And at the end of the day, any investment or whatever is going to have this risk variable. But these are strong indicators. Tenure of CEO or founder in space, like those things you talked about, are just give you more confidence in that discomfort, right?
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think is really cool about the White Star Capital DNA is applying like learnings from totally separate spaces to like each other. That's like just a huge thing for me. And there's this one quote that this guy Victor Wooten, who's a great bass player, has, where he says like, and maybe I'm paraphrasing, but so if I want to be a better bassist, I listen to other bassists. If I want to be a better musician, I listen to all musicians. And his whole thinking was that the more that you see, the more that you can learn from, the more it can inform your playing or like what you're doing, because you're learning what people do somewhere and like in some other space. And bringing that back to White Star, why I like that a part of the DNA is, firstly, just physically that's embedded in us, because you have a team in London and you have a team in Toronto, or you have a team in New York and you have a team in Singapore. And just physically, like you're located there, people do things differently. It's great to see what works in a market, what doesn't work in a market, but then also what's something that they do in this space that's really interesting, that maybe you can apply somewhere else in the world. And that's like one aspect of the DNA, which is great, which is like learning from different geographies and sectors, but then also having people on the team that have such diverse backgrounds who can kind of bring their own areas of expertise and then say like, hey, I'm helping you on my experience on this particular thing that's your issue. That's the thing that I really like about White Star, and that becomes important with the team.
Especially as we looked at like the technology approach with companies, it's like it's so often easy just to kind of, without knowing the answer or like what the best practice is, to just jump into like the lane most traveled and say like, let's just fix this set, as opposed to stepping back, asking people from different backgrounds, and then going into the data to kind of let you deduce the answer from the bottom up. It is always like fascinating to see it in motion, especially as you're using the technology that you're just leveraging that insights to kind of push it forward. One thing I was interested in terms of the relationship you have at the tech level, can you talk a little bit about the CTO-CTO conversations And I think especially, I think that's something that's fairly unique with you all, but especially about like, what is it at that high level that you're listening for, or even a signal level that's interesting from those conversations? And maybe just give a background about what they are in general so we can learn.
Well, I'm happy to give a bit of background on like the CTO conversations that happen. Another thing about like why doing our technical due diligence is great is because both our CTO Alberto and I, we will jump into a call, and often these be like lengthy sessions of like an hour and a half. We've done like 2 hour, 2.5 hour sessions with like other CTOs and like heads of engineering. And we just sit with them and kind of talk through things and everything related to how they're building, what the design of the product is, how they've organized their team. And this does like a couple of things. One of them, of course, is helps us understand, the team, the state that they're in. It also helps us understand what we can do to support them. But a side thing about that is that it starts to build a relationship between us and the team. That's actually been something that we've seen recently, which has been like actually a really nice point of feedback, was based on conversations that we've had as part of during like the negotiation or investment process. There have been some deals that have come back to us. So like one of the reasons why we want to do this deal on top of like all that White Sarah has to offer, but like one of the reasons has been the technical support, because Alberto and I were just tech people, and we're just talking to engineers. And I think there was a head of product the other day that we're talking to, going through his process, and he was saying to us that, it's nice, like you guys just get it. It's easy to have a conversation with you. And so product and technology is so crucial to these companies. Like it's good for us to get in there. And I think a bit of background on Alberto, he was actually the technical co-founder of a company based in the US called Freshly. So he grew that company, sold to Nestle for 1.5 billion, and just kind of he came on board with White Star. So he's had so much experience on everything, like managing data teams of like 100 people, like managing like teams of engineers, going through everything from like IT to product to data to even just like operations. Like he's done implementations of just crazy technology, like built things in-house, externally. So he's kind of gone through everything. So when you're sitting with a CTO, he can be there and say like, hey, this is going to be a problem, because at a certain point, if the CTO is like very like involved, you're going to get further and further from this. So this method of road mapping is not going to scale. That's not a red flag, but that's a way to support the company moving forward. Just saying like, hey, right now, how is your team set up? You have no squads. You have kind of just people who are full stack, and they just go and they just build one part of the product themselves. And, if you have a team of like 4 engineers, then that can work, in the beginning. But at a certain point in time, that doesn't work. At a certain point in time, you need to start putting more emphasis on, you want to release a lot more products. Well, you need to like think about DevOps, and you need to get like a good DevOps team in place. You want to start an app. You want to have a workflow tool, UI. You need like a good design team. You can't outsource this. So it's things like this where, you learn, and then you can advise, but then also from Alberto's experience, he can come in and say like, I went through this and this is what didn't work. This is what did work. And he's also like very open about like, this might not work in your case. And that resonates a lot with CTOs. And I think they like the fact that there's someone there on our team who will bat for them in some way. We're not sitting on the boards of these companies, but we are in a place we'll get the board notes where we know the company, and we're in a place to maybe suggest that, hey, if you want to release this product, you need to allocate more resources to tech. Like I know they need another engineer, or they need another 2 engineers. That's part of like the plan. And then we can kind of be someone in there saying into like the ear of the person at the board that support this if you want this, because we've written it down and this is in our findings. And, we say that that's who we want to be. And we've had some opportunities to suggest things like that. But We've only been doing this for, I'd say, like 2.5 years, really working on the diligence together and like making this as part of the process. But that was always very helpful. One of the most important things that I think, you find that any founders or C-suite need to do is hire, and you need to hire well. And then it's just good to have like, hey, if you're a CTO and you want to hire a VP of engineering, let's have another CTO on the board to talk to them. And we're just a resource. And so some founders or some CTOs, they'll have, a weekly recurring call with Ortho, and some will have, just like an ads needs basis. And some will just reach out when it comes to, in terms of like hiring or certain projects or therapy sessions when things aren't going well. But that's how Ortho calls them. But I think everyone in the founder level or at the C-suite has that counterpoint in a firm, but not so much tech, which is why right now, I think at least it's being received quite positively to whoever we're talking to.
It's a great model. And I think that's oftentimes from the outside world looking into this industry, it's sometimes forgotten that it's not just, investment in dollars. It's investment in acumen and advisory and skill and time. And there's often operators who have been in the space, seen a thing or two, so we cover a thing or two type of motion, where it's that angle is always kind of sometimes lost in the shuffle of appreciation, where it's how much of that time goes in. There's this element that is always curious where it's like, you have to, like the obstacles, the failures are so critical, that lifeblood to evolving the product. And like you have to hit a no to figure out like, what the product must do by stumbling through it. You guys see a lot of companies in that post-investment area where it's like, they're going down the path, they advise it, but maybe you see some of the cracks in like what is the market feasibility of something, or launch and we disagree with the vision. How often is that, or how do you manage that part where it's like you have differing opinions and different decision makes and letting them have the remit to go and take a chance and trust their gut, even though it might fail and that might be a positive learning experience?
We try to stay in our lane as much as possible. And I think we have a certain set of experiences that enable us to kind of form an opinion on a company and their tech. That makes sense. That's logical. And the other things as well is that you avoid things like unnecessary like conflict. If you're coming at your own team and say like, hey, I don't know if like the market is going this way for this kind of product, talking a bit about like the financials and things like that. You don't want to get there because other people who maybe are looking at markets who have done, like deep dives into TAM and all of these, like done actually like modeling, done like the comps and the benchmarks, that data will tell you something different. And you gotta like trust that. And I think what we try to do most of the time is that if we have a pushback, and when I mean a pushback, I mean like in a sense by like we have certain feelings about like an investment where we think that maybe this team is building right now, but is currently not set up for success in the next stage, which is a good finding because it's saying that if things are working well for them in the other aspects of them, then it becomes a point of how well are they going so that we can offer this support to the team, or is it give them our advice and we say like work on these things and this will help you grow, or they're growing so well that we need to be part of like helping them. And I guess one of the questions that gets asked a lot is how easy is this to replicate? That you come in when you're looking at a company, you say like, how easy is this to replicate? Is what the team done truly like a differentiator? And then that's when diving into the tech just like really, really helps, because then you can see that like the way that they have designed this approach is leagues better than the alternatives that we have tried. So if you keep it very much like on the product itself, you don't have to like worry about having discussions around like, oh, I'm not sure if they found like the right market or the right space to do it. Just focus on the product and say like, hey, this product is well designed from a technology perspective. This team, they're very sharp, they're very smart, because at the end of the day, like ideas are almost cheap. Like, there's so many people doing the same, building the same thing or in the same space, but it's the little things about how that team is special and how that approach to that product is special that makes the difference.
We could have a whole possible spin-off show on just like that post-investment, like the strategy they're setting. How do you monitor, like ongoing monitoring and like post-investment signaling is probably like a world of curiosity in terms of management and all the stuff that seemingly everyone was like, these measurements, it's like things can't be measured, but it's like finding how to at least normalize data to measure in the post world, and taking things that are strategy or software into that measurable universe is fascinating. Because you were talking about earlier, scraping these data sources or public databases to start to kind of translate what people see as like trends to be data driven signals. Now there's this kind of whole other world of post investment where it's like, what are you doing? What did you say you were going to do? What are you doing? How did it end up? And that measuring process is also like a fascinating thing to make sure that, like, how are we course correcting, or how are we staying true to that? And how do you measure that to have a better opinion? In terms of technology in the space that you're in, are there trends or specific technologies out there that are getting you really intellectually curious or really kind of getting excited?
We have a team that does that, and a team who's been doing that like really well. I try to support more in the early growth side of things. But one of the things that I find fascinating is we did a survey of all of our portfolio companies and the AI tools that they're using. We just wanted to get an idea of just where are our companies, that we invest in, where are they putting their dollars? And there were a few ways that they're either, like building internally or they're buying. And use case is either an internal operational use case or an external. And that was, actually just a great learning to see what is tripping people up, what they don't have the resources for right now that they feel like a tool can help them. As it pertains to this question, one of the interesting things that we found was that there were a lot of use cases in which there was investment made into AI tooling, but then stopped because they didn't see the ROI. The reason being is that a lot of these tools take you from 80% of the way there, but then you have to do that last kind of 20% of the work, which if you haven't done that first 80%, can take like a really long time. And people are coming back to meeting people where they are because they haven't gone through that part of the process, and they just try to like skip that. Then they have to go back and they have to do a few things to get it back in place. I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing right now in AI is that we've gone from software being something that was deterministic in the sense by like if you wrote code for like a button, that button 10 times out of 10 should do what you've written it to do without fail. And if it does, that means there's a bug. So we're used to that with software. We're used to things doing the same thing over and over again. But we're not used to that with AI, because now we're coming at something that's probabilistic, which is going to spit out a different answer or a different solution every single time. And that doesn't fit into the way that we interact with tools. But I think what we're really interested in seeing, or at least like what I'm super interested in seeing, is that what are the use cases that are going to take off in industries like that aren't as open-ended. Like where AI took a hold was in creative fields like design work or art or like video, because that it's just like a tool for like imagination and creation. Whereas where is it going to actually be somewhere in which there are people who can use it and it helps their kind of day to day. So that's kind of a long-winded way of me getting to. I'm kind of excited about seeing the verticalization of some tooling, as well about some of like the infrastructure that supports this.
It begs the question, whose job is it to figure that out? Is it not the engineering side to figure out better ways of meeting the users where they are? Is it the user's job to be more technologically adaptive and figuring out how to articulate questions or where to go there?
I think it has to be like a thing of both. And I think maybe the reason why I'm interested in it is because that's something that's, I think, important to me, which is meet people where they are, or at least learn what they're like, how to speak to them so that you can build for them. And so following that thread, I think wherever that leads is exciting to me.
Yeah, I think that's resonated, right? That meeting people where they are, and that what you've talked about your career arc, right? Where it's, understanding the data, but then understanding the application or how it's solving what job is it doing? What is it solving for the people? What process is it enabling and taking it into there is really that theme. And then moreover, like with AI and this technology, it's how do we get more specific on what job it needs to solve for a specific use case, and taking that to cover that last 20%, so that adoption is meeting them where they are in the process they're doing, not an adjustment of their behavior, because we're always beholden to what they will do and what they won't do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one question is, what's a piece of advice that you give somebody who's trying to break into capital or private capital or the industry from a non-traditional background like yours?
So I think piece of advice I have for someone trying to enter venture capital, private equity from a non-traditional background, I think one thing first and foremost is that the finance folk are going to be able to do things that you can't. Don't try to fight that battle over there and spend the time to learn, how to model companies or get really deep into the weeds of looking at, cash flow projections or cohort analysis, things like that. Those will be helpful and you will learn. But I think the thing that will be the most helpful is figuring out how you can, based on your experiences, bring the most value to people around you in a VC setting. And there's a reason why there are so many operators who end up in VC. And that's because they are there to offer support and advice in a way that no one necessarily on the team is able to give. And I think that comes from experiences, but then also how you go about doing things. One of the things that I think is, what are you really interested in? And it's really important to have an understanding about what you are very interested in, but then also how you go about feeding that interest. There's a big thing if you see where you spend a whole lot of your time doing deep dives. And so that's a skill that you can't really learn on the job. One of the things that kind of really helped me in the beginning in VC, I had mentioned, there was that first deal that I worked on that I wrote the memo for. But one of the ways that actually brought some value to the team, I was looking at the company and I was just going through the normal things I would to check out how good is this software, which is I'm going to go on Reddit or something. I think one of the partners looked at me and was like, I never thought to go on Reddit to look for one of the startups that we're looking at, and just the different places that I knew how to look for just ideas or kind of insights or feedback on this company. All of those are things where, it kind of came from my background, what I'm interested in, what I'm good at. And in the end, I'm in a place right now, I'm in VC, where I try to spend time learning the tools, the finance side of things, but that's not where my value comes in, or at least how the team tells me that my value comes in. It's from the things that, from my experiences, make me me, and my ability to deep dive into things in a way that only I can do. And that comes from just having an understanding of what are you interested in, what is special about your kind of insights or knowledge or the way that you approach things, and then try to break in that way, because it's difficult. And ultimately, I almost think you have a better chance of coming in sideways than you do head up, because you got to go through investment banking. You have to do that. You have to be in the trenches of all of that, and then make your way to VC. But there's always advice you can offer, and especially if you've done projects or things that resonate maybe with people, and you have an understanding of how people buy or how people build or should build. I think that's one way of doing it.
It's very interesting, because one thing we hear a lot in that same question is always, how do you balance having an interest in many things while also being able to cultivate a depth on a number of things, and the balance between those two?
You should just deep dive into everything.
One gear, a lot of holes, very deep on all.
Yeah.
That's awesome. No, it's wonderful, man. Hey, it's been really a pleasure talking to you and catching up on these things. And it's especially it's always very exciting to hear people who are intellectually curious in so many things, and having it drive them and dig into them and have it lead them down these creative paths is awesome to see, because your excitement reflects in the answers and the work you do. So I really genuinely appreciate you taking the time to talk about it.
No, thank you. Thank you for letting me talk about it.
Thanks for listening to Preferred Return. If you found this episode thought-provoking, consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about today's topic, or for additional takeaways to own your technology edge, visit altvia.com. That's altvia.com. We're back next month with another episode, so stick around, and let's make sure you get that preferred return.